Good afternoon, everyone. Good to connect with all of you. I hope everyone has been keeping healthy. Keep very good care of yourself and your near and dear ones. Wish you all the very best. The question in everybody's mind of late has been why markets are going up so much when the ground reality reflects a slightly different picture than what the markets have been showing. This People think that there is a lot of exuberance in market, while economy, of course, as the data shows, it's been opening up, things are improving, but still we are going to have a year where the GDP is likely to decline by close to it. We'll have a double digit output loss. In fact, as per RBI's estimates, for FY21, India's economy is likely to degrow by 9.5%. And where do we go from here? First of all, the disconnect between the economy and the market. Markets are forward looking. The data that you have been looking at about the economy or whether the corporate profits or any other economic activity is the past data. The biggest change over the last few months has been, I think the reason for markets, for the markets to go up is that the public discourse has undergone a change. In the month of March and April, the public discourse was Jaan hai to jahan hai. Now it is Jan B, Jahan B. The mood has shifted decisively from survival only to revival also. In India, there are signs that the COVID curve is flattening. Of course, the headline numbers are still very high. They have come off from the peak, but we are one of the large, we have been witnessing one of the largest number of infections in the world. Of course, the testing has gone up very significantly. The positive aspect about India is that the recovery rate has been improving. The CFR, the case fatality rate has been going down, approaching almost 1% now on an incremental basis. And that the originally, I think what was thought out that testing, tracing, isolating and informing is the way to go. There has been a lot of efforts taken on that aspect. And incrementally, we are seeing that with the protection or the I think prevention has been kind of become the main thing rather than keep waiting for the vaccine, which still we do not have an idea at what time we'll be able to get the vaccine and at what point in time we'll be able to vaccinate a large amount of the global population. The economy is coming back to normalcy at a faster pace, but there are several trends there. In fact, I've used the word a K-shaped recovery because there are segments of the economy that are doing well. There are sectors which are not doing well, and that will continue for quite some time. If you look at our economy, the goods economy has been opening up faster versus the service sector. The formal sector is doing better than the informal sector. The rural has been doing better than the urban. And similarly, when you look at the global economy, there are lots of those kind of trends. But I think the first thing is that I think the faith in human ingenuity, that the way we have been able to deal with several crises in history, the human ingenuity will be able to deal with this crisis as well. The second was the valuations became very cheap and markets always move like a pendulum. When we had 500 cases, Nifty was at 8,000. When we have hundreds of thousands of cases, Nifty is at 12,000 because at that point in time, it was the fear of the unknown. At this point in time, I think there's a hope of a better future going forward. The policy reaction has been extraordinarily strong this time, and both the monetary and the fiscal policy globally has ensured that the sharp drawdown in the economy, the sharp loss of the economic output, to a large extent, the governments world over and the central banks world over have been trying to underwrite that. Because the economies haven't opened up fully, the additional liquidity or the excess liquidity in the system has chased the asset prices, and that is also one of the reasons asset prices have been going up. Lower interest rates, we are seeing historically lowest interest rates across the world. They also have played a big role because interest rates work in variety of ways. For equity market, one that for the corporates, the cost of paying interest comes down. Also, as like Munger says that interest rates are like apple to the, gravity to the apple. So when the rates come down and when you are discounting the future cash flows, the present value goes up because you are discounting at a lower rate. Even if cash flows are far in future, they become more valuable. And that's the reason some of the growth stocks, the way they have been trading in the world, I think the lower interest rates are playing a big role there. And policymakers have absolutely done an unprecedented job. The amount of liquidity which has got printed over the last few months, and with the aggression that the central banks have shown in terms of forward guidance, saying that for next several years, even if inflation surprises on the upside, even if the unemployment rate surprises on the downside, they will keep a very, very accommodative policy. That has clearly given a lot of comfort to the market and surely fueling an asset price rally across the board. Of course, there are going to be some long-term repercussion of the policy measures that have been taken, but we can discuss that separately more from a longer term perspective. But in the near term, the strong policy reaction has surely helped all the asset prices, and which is also reflecting in the high correlation among all the asset classes, which clearly shows that liquidity has been one of the prime driver behind the asset price rally. The Robinhood effect, which has been discussed a lot, the entry of large number of new retail investors or the millennials into the market, the way some of the stocks in US after the split went up. I mean, the split of a stock does not add any value, does not create a new value to the company, or there are various other things. I'm sure you might be reading about the options activity and a lot of other things about this new phenomena where the stock exchange is in your pocket. I mean, a news wire is in your pocket, and the implications it's having on all the asset markets, that has clearly played a role. I also keep saying that when people say about the economy and the market, they forget one fact, that economy is not listed in the market. There are thousands of subsidiaries which are listed in the stock market, and there are companies which are actually, they're kind of immune to the virus. In fact, they may have benefited from whatever is happening currently. And the companies that have got impacted, maybe some of the support that has come from the policymakers, it may have a longer term positive repercussion on them. Some of the other stocks that have fallen because of the near term challenges with those sectors or those businesses, but valuations have become so cheap that for a long-term investors, it makes sense to participate in those businesses. And that's why it's important to understand this difference between what's happening in the economy. As I mentioned earlier, that economy data that you are looking is backward looking. What we are looking at is the forward looking outlook. And there are a lot of businesses. I mean, talking about India sometime back, we discussed that how an IT sector or a healthcare sector could be a structural beneficiary, how the realignment of global geopolitics could turn out to be positive for some of the sectors in India, like chemicals or electronics, how the rural economy has been relatively better off for a variety of reasons, including to better monsoon or good harvesting, some of the spending that has been done by the government, and various other reasons like the positive wealth effect of gold, so on and so forth. So definitely that has done better and companies have benefited from it. And the way the world is getting virtualized and companies, I think, using data in a better manner or technology in a better manner, they've been a beneficiary, which is clearly reflecting in the results of the first quarter. In fact, the cost rationalization that has been done by a large number of companies has been extraordinary. Of course, some part of that cost will go up as and when the normalcy comes back, but a part of this cost rationalization can actually become quite structural as companies are reinventing themselves, trying to find newer ways of dealing with their customers or servicing their customers or dealing with their supply chain or in various aspects of their business, whether it's manufacturing or the services. So that has also played a role. In fact, talking about India, in the month of March and April, we had almost 90% of our universe was witnessing an earnings downgrade. Currently, as we speak, 90% of our universe is witnessing an earnings upgrade because analysts downgraded the earnings projections. Now, as the normalcy is returning back, we are seeing upgrades in the earnings expectations, of course, from a lower base. And also, I always mention about this aspect called theory of reflexivity, which I used to read from George Soros, that it is not only fundamentals that impact prices. There are times when even prices impact the fundamentals. And I'll just give you some examples from it. Recent example. Everybody was very worried about the financial sector in the month of March and April because we were not in the pink of health. Some of the events that have happened in last 2 years, I think people were a little worried about the financial sector for the right reasons. But over the last few months, as foreign flows have continued, as the markets did well, large number of financials have been able to raise a lot of capital. So the tail risk which was could have been a big risk in the month of March and April, is now not there. And higher prices itself creates some kind of a positive momentum, some kind of a feel-good factor, a positive wealth effect, and that also sometimes feeds into the fundamentals, and that aspect should never be underestimated. Talking about Indian, I'll come back to markets in a few minutes time. I thought I'll take few minutes on our sense about how are we seeing things panning out in our economy. So India had a very stringent lockdown, and of course we paid a heavy price in terms of the economic output loss. The first quarter GDP a decline of almost close to 24%. This year, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are going to have close to a double-digit output loss. In fact, we are likely to have a double-digit GDP growth in the year 2021-22. But even with that, the FY22 GDP, the end GDP and FY22 GDP will be almost same where we started this year. So it's going to be a very, very big output loss. People ask about, and we were already decelerating in terms of economic growth for 6 or 7 quarters. Again, I'll repeat that word which I mentioned earlier. People ask me, is it going to be an L-shaped, U-shaped, V-shaped? And I give an answer that is going to be a K-shaped. In fact, the letter A could have been better. There are going to be various segments. There are going to be various dynamics and various dimensions that you need to pay attention to. And it is not only the GDP growth data, but any data that you are looking at, whether it's the IIP or PMI or CPI or corporate earnings growth or even the market P ratio, you should look for the internals rather than looking at only the headline. It's very important to see the internals because there are very interesting dimensions. I mean, we are in an uncharted territory. We are in a new world with a lot of new dimensions, and that must be kept in mind. But from a policy response perspective, if you look at the overall policy response in India on the fiscal side, to our belief, I mean, there are like 3 planks to it. Number one, the guarantees given to certain segments of the economy which are deeply impacted, SMEs, MSMEs, the micro enterprises, etc., which I think the government did it beautifully. That gives the multiplier effect to the amount of money printing that RBI has done. Because of these guarantees, money could reach out to the segments which needed that money. Without these guarantees, banks would not have been too comfortable lending that money. So that was a very good thing. The number 2 is focus on the structural reforms, which is like what we have done on the agriculture side, what we have done on the labor side, the performance linked incentive, the PLI for some of these sectors, which is structurally very positive to rejuvenate manufacturing in India, the new education policy, opening up FDI into defense or more, the domestic manufacturing of defense. Some of these long-term structural reforms are very, very positive for the economy. And it's a heartening feature that despite this current environment, the government has not lost focus on the structural reforms. The third aspect is the cash stimulus. And there, the total amount spent is less than 2% of GDP for this year. We would argue that I think we need to do more because the private sector would be saving more amount of money. They would be investing less. And that's why government needs to do a little more heavy lifting, whether in terms of NREGA, which can create jobs, whether in terms of more higher capex, there could be, more incentives for the residential real estate, particularly. I mean, the sector is just ripe for, I would say, activity pickup because real rates are negative. Builders don't have the capacity to hold on to inventory. And if there is bit of incentive like Maharashtra cut the stamp duty, I think there is little bit of more incentive can really help the real estate sector. So we would argue for a more, I would say, a cash stimulus, maybe around the festival time. I mean, the government announced something a few days back this week, but we would argue that government should spend more amount of money because our belief is that a lot of people have started talking about 5% is a new normal for India. And our belief is that we should not fall prey to that. We need to get 7 or 8% growth, given the state of the economy where we are, state of society where we are, the kind of jobs that we need to create. Half of the country, if you look at the northern side of India, I mean, it's like less than $1,000 per capita GDP. You look at the rural side of India, less than $1,000 per capita GDP. And even if we don't get higher growth, then the debt ratios will look very, very ugly. So today we are worried that if we spend more money, fiscal deficit will go up, debt ratios will go up, but debt ratios in the long run to us can only be brought down if we focus on the denominator, which is like get higher growth. Automatically the ratios will start looking better and better. And the worry has been how will we fund, because there is so much of pressure of the government borrowing. So our sense is that government is this saving. Government will be investing more money, will have to invest more money, but private sector is saving more. How do we say private sector is saving more? It's reflecting in the current account surplus. What is current account surplus? It's the difference between our investments and our savings. And if we are in surplus, it surely shows that private sector savings are going up. We know that given the overall economic environment, private sector would be reluctant in investing. Private sector would be investing more money. And that's why the government deficit can be funded by higher private savings and also higher foreign saving. There is so much of liquidity available globally, which can be, if we give a faith to the world that over a period of time, medium-term growth in our country is 7 and 8%, and that's how the debt ratios will not look as bad as they will look in next 1 year. World will be willing to fund our deficits. And of course, RBI is very much there, which has been doing a tremendous amount of, I would say, heavy lifting over the last few months. Right since this COVID crisis, whether in terms of cutting the rates, injecting liquidity, providing moratorium during the difficult time, allowing one-time restructuring of loans, even if the times are better, to ensure that this P&L recession does not become a permanent balance sheet recession. So one-time restructuring and various other prudential norms, right from how to get more home finance to how to support the exporters or various segments of the economy. And they have used unorthodox measures, they have used unprecedented measures, have been very bold and creative. So whether it's the TLTRO or Operation Twist or the higher hold-till maturity ratio for banks, OMO and SDL, very strong forward guidance, all of these. Of course, they also have challenge. They are dealing with a higher inflation in the near term. They are dealing with a lot of capital flows, because when there are a lot of capital flows, RBI intervenes not to allow the currency to appreciate, then you are increasing rupee liquidity in the system. If you are allowing rupee liquidity in the system, then it pushes up inflation. I mean, it can feed into higher inflation with higher liquidity. How do you take, and then there is a lot of government borrowing that they have to get worried about. So there are multiple objectives that RBI has been dealing with, but they have been giving a lot of confidence to the market that we will not allow interest rates to go up. We want liquidity to remain comfortable. We want financial stability, and our focus is going to be on growth. And that's why I said that RBI still has a lot of ability to take up additional government borrowing if it is for the purpose like capex or maybe an REGA, which impacts the higher growth in the near term and also in the long term. So that's on the policy side and on the economy side. Now, when I come back to the market and you look at the world today, there are definitely a lot of challenges. We are dealing with a lot of uncertainty pertaining to this health crisis. Look at the numbers in Europe. I mean, the France announced a night curfew yesterday. UK's announced a lot of other restrictive measures. I mean, there still we don't have the full grip on the trajectory of this virus, though I must say that the medical protocols are improving. I think people have become, I would say, a lot better aware about how to deal with crisis. The policy response has been good. When I say policy, I think the health infrastructure and the corporate sector and the communities and societies are a lot better prepared. But still, I mean, a lot of uncertainty is around us. The economic uncertainty is definitely there because of this health crisis and the long-term implications of this economic growth, the output loss, the social crisis, because with a lot of this money printing, asset prices going up and job creation not being there, a lot of automation will lead to job losses. And there is a possibility of like a lot of social crisis as well. So the world has to deal with it. There are geopolitical crises, whether you look at the US elections or whether you look at US, China, India, China, the final move towards the Brexit, etc. There are definitely climate crisis. If you look at the California fires, or you look at the lot of weather events, erratic weather events globally this year, which also have some repercussion. In India, we have seen them manifesting in higher food prices in some places, or globally there are a lot of repercussion. And as a house, we are highly focused on ESG. That's why I'm talking about it. So when we look at all of this, definitely the near-term uncertainty continues. And for the reasons that I mentioned in the beginning, including the Robin Hood effect, and we are in a new territory, volatility is likely to continue, and we must brace for it. This is something that we have been saying for some time. I'll continue to expect a much higher volatility as we get closer to US elections and some of the other events. We really don't know how are they going to pan out. The other way to look at it, and that's how we are looking at it, and that's what we want that message to be left with the investors, that for the last 10 years, particularly when we look at Indian equity markets, they have not really delivered what would have been expected 10 years back. In fact, the returns have been closer to or lower than the fixed income funds. In some of the categories, they have delivered better than the fixed income. Of course, look at, I mean, which period you are looking at, the starting point, and maybe at 10, 11, or 9 years, if you look at any particular period. There is a long period where equity investors haven't really got compensated fully for the risk they may have taken. And when 10 years have not been so good, but on the other side, valuations are at an all-time high. So valuations are not cheap today. But why valuations are not cheap today? Because last 10 years, the reason equities have not done well and valuations looking high is that corporate profits have disappointed in last 10 years. Corporate profits as a percentage of GDP are at an all-time low this year. In fact, even at the last year as well, over the last few years, we have seen consistent deceleration in corporate profit growth. Variety of reasons for last 2-3 years. Every year at the beginning, we would mention that this is the year of normalization, but then every year analysts would have some or the other excuse to justify why the profit growth was not good. My sense is that it has reached a level, and of course, as I mentioned, that even last year I could have said the same, or I might have said the same, but we have reached a level where from here on, there should be a normalization going forward. So if we are able to get higher growth, and within that, if we are able to get a mean reversion in the corporate profits, and if we look back in history and see any period where a long period like 7, 8, 10 years, not so good for the equities, the subsequent 7, 8, 10 years have been good for the equity market. So if you take a short-term view and near-term view, hazy clouds are there, and definitely a lot of uncertainties there. Markets have run fast. There is always a reason for maybe a correction here and there. But if you take a longer term picture, I think the next 10 years, the picture should be that corporate profits normalize, growth comes back to normalcy. And as I mentioned earlier, that I hope that policymakers, businesses, all of us work together and we don't fall prey to the 5% is a new normal. There are certain positives about India, and external sector is in a good shape. If data is the new oil, then India should be leading the new OPEC, which is what I call open platform for e-cooperation. India should definitely be in a highly advantageous position. If we look at the new geopolitical alignment, given the animosity towards China, India should be a very big beneficiary, given a large economy, a democratic setup, the kind of the institutions that we have, the kind of entrepreneurship we have, the large pool of labor supply, a huge growth potential for India. If we can increase the absorption capacity, it could be a very, very interesting investment destination. We are seeing the the green shoots in some of the sectors that I talked about earlier, like electronics or chemicals and all. I hope that we see that in many more sectors, and India can attract a lot more of the global capital. World is sitting on so much of liquidity. If we can continue with the structural reforms that we have taken over the last several years, right from the GST to RERA to IBC to what I talked about recently, the financialization of the savings, the digitalization of the economy, the formalization of the economy. We've also taken a lot of pain because of some of these structural reforms where there's going to be a long-term gain, but we have taken lot of short-term pain. I hope that a new cycle starts, and then I think the markets would be able to deliver that to all the investors. And talking about the companies, as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of companies which can take advantage of this new world, the new environment, the new opportunities on one side. There are a lot of risk in the economy. There are a lot of challenges in the economy, but there are going to be very, very interesting opportunities. There is going to be a massive creative destruction over the next several years. The way of doing business is going to change. As I mentioned about the virtual reality or a lot more technological disruption, changes in the consumer behavior, changes in policy, changes in the geopolitics, supply chain, variety of changes and companies that can take advantage of that. And those will be the new set of players for next 10 years who will reap the benefit. Before I end, I just want to take few minutes on the environment for the investors in which we are living, or the world we are in. So we are in a world with radical uncertainty. We are in a world where there is so much of uncertainty that the only thing, I keep repeating this, the only thing I can say with certainty is continuity of uncertainty. Also, I mean, you look at last 20 years, the amount of events that have happened. I mean, every 1 or 2 years, right from the dot-com bust to 9/11 to global financial crisis to taper tantrum to demon to whatever COVID, every year or two you have an event which is like a one-off event. So one-off event keep happening on a recurring basis. Number two, the world is moving a lot faster. You have seen where the markets were in February. You have seen where the markets were in March and April, and you see the where markets are. The information is moving at the speed of light. Things are moving so fast. You look at the policymakers' reaction. You look at the way this virus spread to 200 years. The world is a lot more connected compared to the world that we have lived, the previous generation may have lived, or maybe even a couple of years back, which also creates its own dynamics. Some of the sectors that we thought about in the month of March and April, in some of our calls, we may have discussed that. Who could be the structural beneficiary of the crisis we are in? And look at the price movement in last few months. We were not expecting it, that things would move in such a short period of time. But the cycles are getting shorter and shorter because information is moving faster and faster. Now, again, when the information is moving so much, it has another repercussion for the investor, which is that you don't know what is the right information. You don't know what is fake, what is the signal, what is the noise, and how do you react in your investment. And as someone said very rightly, that investing is not about what you know, it's about how you behave. And in this world where things are so uncertain, things are moving so fast, there is so much of information, I think how do we react? I think that becomes very, very important, that we don't get swayed by the volatility or by the noise that gets created. Now, there are a lot of implications of the world that I've talked about in last couple of minutes. If the world is so much, I mean, there is so much of uncertainty, then how do you hedge the tail risk? I mean, some or the other tail risk keeps coming. I mean, absolutely unknown event and markets crash so much. Should you keep higher cash? Maybe, yeah, there is a reason one needs to keep some cash. People realized it in the hard way in the month of March and April. Now, cash is going to earn much, much lower because central banks globally will ensure that rates remain in the negative territory. Real rates remain in the negative territory. Inflation is running higher than where the policy or the overnight rates are. Now, should you have higher bonds given the uncertainty? But bonds are also going to return lower, particularly on an inflation adjusted basis. As I said, that there is going to be financial repression. Governments are borrowing so much of money, central banks will be supporting them, and they will ensure that governments don't pay much higher real rates. They would like real rates to remain in negative. So the bond portfolio, you have to keep that in mind. If the government debt keeps ballooning, I'm talking about the global economy, the government debt keeps ballooning and central bank balance sheet keep expanding with deglobalization and all, can inflation come back? In last 30 or 40 years, globally bonds have done so well. Will this rally continue for next 30 or 40 years? May or may not. Maybe all of these policies will result in reflation or inflation. And in that case, it would be a different environment. Now, to hedge against the possibility of a deflation or an inflation, what are the other options with the investor? One of the things people have been doing, and I suggest as like maybe some bit of allocation to maybe precious metals like gold. If let's say central banks keep printing money, if the uncertainty continues, geopolitical risk, etc. But remember one thing, gold doesn't earn anything in the portfolio. So whatever is the allocation to gold, to that extent, the income of the portfolio comes down even more. So then, So with all of this, like globally now, pension funds and all are allocating more money to equities because bonds are not earning anything, cash is not earning anything, gold doesn't earn, it's just a hedge, but you don't know, I mean, how do you calculate the, a long-term value? How do you put a long-term value to it? Should you put more in equities? But equities are priced for perfection. They will not be cheap because, as I mentioned in the beginning, when the discounting rate is low, you are discounting the future cash flows, and the present value is higher because you are discounting at a lower rate. And within equities also, you are seeing several interesting trend. I mean, something which is growth or quality trading at a much higher price. You have a lot of asset rich businesses trading at like a lower and lower multiple. So on a lighter note, we have a market in the world where either you are priceless or it is what I call valueless. I mean, there are stocks where no price is high. There are stocks where no price is kind of low. With all of these repercussion, I don't know, maybe with the different kind of fiscal policy going forward, Keynesian policy being followed, if inflation comes back, then my sense is that the so-called value or the asset-rich businesses can come back in a meaningful manner. I'm talking about the stock prices of them. But all of these things are dependent on lots of the way things evolve over the next few years. If the real rates remain negative, I talked about the attraction of the real assets. I talked about the gold earlier. But my sense is that we are going to see higher activity in the real estate also, because with the negative real rates, we have seen in history the difference between the EMI rate and the rental yields have come down with so much of liquidity in the system, other asset markets doing well, possibility that even residential real estate starts doing well. And thanks to, if this is a liquidity driven rally, or a lot, or if the asset markets are a lot supported by the central banks, then the correlation among all of the asset classes, equities, bonds, gold, commodities, all of them have gone up substantially. Then how do you diversify your portfolio? Because I mean, we have seen days when all of these go up together or you go down together. And that's why the importance of true asset allocation is very important. I can just go on. And these are the things that one needs to keep in mind, the longer term implications of Robinhood effect, the longer term implications of the challenges from the liquidity in the market. We have seen some of the funds shutting down or markets on circuit breaker. So how do you keep part of the portfolio which is liquid, but at the same time, because of those concerns, there are pockets which are becoming very, very attractive, and you should not lose sight of that. For example, at some point in time, credit markets will become very attractive. The parts of credit markets, I mean, I mentioned it some time back that in the AAA and AA segment where the spreads were very attractive, they have come down very significantly, but the A-rated or below, that can only be played through, let's say, an alternative investment fund or something. But those will become very attractive as people are willing to pay a much higher price for liquidity, having seen what they have seen in last few months. So fundamental tenets of investing won't change, but some of these things that investors need to keep in mind: how do you hedge the tail risk? Should you have higher cash? Cash matters, liquidity matters. I mean, the taxes will remain high because if the government debt is high and is going to remain structurally high, ultimately those debt will have to be paid back. And that's why I think taxes on individuals in some or the other manner will remain high. And that's why it's important that whenever you are looking at investment, you don't lose sight of that aspect as well. So if I put all of this together, I think so one has to save more and one has to invest more to get the same amount of earnings, because as I mentioned, that there will be globally a lot of repression of the financial markets, and the real rates remain negative. Lucky that in absolute terms, and the curve is very steep and you are getting compensated well for both the term premiums and the credit spreads. But globally, I think it's going to be quite challenging for the investors. Asset allocation becomes very, very important. And it is not only about like just across asset classes, but across styles, across geographies. And it has to be a true asset allocation or true diversification. Like in fixed income, for example, people were like overexposed to credit, or some people maybe now become overexposed to duration. I think you need to have very appropriate, the asset allocation or the diversification needed to be there. And we have seen how the market cycles are getting shorter and shorter, and that's why the need for constant rebalancing only goes up, because mean reversion happens so fast. So let's say the people who could do that rebalancing when the equity markets fell sharply, rather than stopping your SIP, if you reallocated money to equity, you have reaped the benefits. I think that is also very important. And with all of these things, the more I think about it, I would definitely say that the importance of advice will go up structurally. I think in a world which is so uncertain, in a world which is moving so fast, in a world with there is so much of information, actually creates a lot of challenges for the investors, and it's important that they get right kind of advice, and there the importance of behavior management becomes so critical. The multi-asset allocation strategies, and as a house we have invested very heavily over the last several years in terms of, several products that we have, for example, our multi-asset allocation product, which invest in equity, fixed income, and gold, whether it's the aggressive hybrid or the conservative hybrid, or a couple of other asset allocation products. I think they become quite important in the overall scheme of things for the investors as well as for the advisors. How are we looking at? I'll just take maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes on how are we looking at this period in our own investing. So talking about the equity, I always say that there are two ways to make money. Either you focus on the pricing or you focus on the timing. Over the last 20 years, we have seen that, there are those one-off events that happen like on a recurring basis. How do you try to time that? We do that in our asset allocation product, but in our equity funds, our focus remains on the bottom-up stock picking, and looking at the world today, looking at where we are, looking at all the disruptions and the big transformations that are underway, the importance of bottom-up stock picking only goes up. I think at this point in time, I can safely say that the most important aspect when you're buying an equity or a business, the important aspect is look at the management. So we focus on right business, right management, and right valuation. But I think the most important aspect within that is the management that build resilience in the business, given the uncertainty. The focus on the risk management, not just a scenario planning or an Excel sheet, but how to build the feedback loop, how to reinvent, reimagine your business, how to look at scenarios which could be completely unknown, and how do you build the right kind of mechanism to deal with that and adapt yourself to a new reality, how to become more nimble and agile, how to look at more R&D and innovation, how to look at your resources, which is the main thing, is your talent, very differently now in a new work from home world. How do you look at your relationship with all the stakeholders? And so in short, I think these are the few R that we have been focusing on, which will become increasingly more and more important going forward. On the debt side, we have been very cautious on the credit side, have been, I would say, more aggressive on the duration side. And main reason behind that has been the faith on the central bank, that RBI has been very aggressive, giving very bold, I would say, view to the bond market, that we will not allow interest rates to go up given the situation in which economy is. We will look through the near-term higher inflation, we will look through the fiscal situation, but we will ensure that bond yields remain low. And I think because of that, we have been running higher duration. We remain cautious on the credit side. Having said that, if you look at the entire, the basket of the fixed income funds today, and you look at the ARC, the current yield of the portfolios, the liquid and overnight are in the 3 handle. You have the low duration products, etc., are in the 4 handle or even now lower. You have the short term corporate bond, banking PSU, of course, highly safe portfolios in the 5 handle. You have the gilt fund, dynamic bond, etc., because the GSEC and the SDL yields are 6 plus, you get on annualized basis 6 handle. And you have the medium duration and the credit risk fund, which are in 7 or slightly higher. So you're getting compensated well for taking the term risk or the credit risk. In some of these products, if you have a little bit of credit risk appetite, then maybe something like a medium duration fund, which keeps the maturity around 4 years or so, and takes a little bit of credit risk in a very, very calibrated manner, highly diversified. I think those could be a good product looking at where the interest rate structure is. Because I mean, if you keep the money in overnight, it's earning like 3% or so, and then you are getting like almost 4% of the additional return there on the debt side. As I mentioned, that multi-asset allocation, etc., are good because there you get exposure to all the asset classes. On the equity, I mean, people ask about the large cap versus mid cap versus small cap and all. And our view has been that it's not about the market cap. It's about the right business and the right management. It could be any market cap. I think it's the nimbleness and agility of the management, not the size of the physical asset or not the size of the market cap today. So there are opportunities across market cap. So maybe something like a multi-cap and other products where you get an opportunity to participate across all market capitalization. On a lighter note, when people ask about the large versus mid and small, I always say that India itself, I mean, when you compare Indian market with some of the companies in US, one or two companies are like 2, 3, I mean, put together, the top 3, 4 companies are put together $3, $4 trillion, which is much more than the entire market cap of India. So we are a small cap in a world and a long way to go. So definitely there are a lot of opportunities across market cap side. Last 6 months have clearly shown the power of human ingenuity. Thanks to your support, good wishes, blessings, we have been able to run our business very efficiently, have tried newer ways of serving you, have tried newer ways of reaching out to you, and your support is very, very important for us. Your blessings are very important for us, and I keep thanking for all the support you have been giving. I just repeat the line that at the beginning of this crisis, when we spoke, and you know, interesting aspect that I always say that constraint is the mother of invention. Because we are constrained and cannot meet physically, we have been able to meet you a lot more through the virtual means and have been able to reach out a lot more through the virtual means. And at that point in time, I said that dark clouds are always followed by a shining sun. This time won't be any different. And I remain ever more confident that while the near term clouds may be little hazier, they are less hazier compared to where they were few months back as far as the impact of the COVID crisis is concerned, but there are some of the other risks on the horizon. But I remain very confident that together all of us will ensure that India does well over a long period of time, and we are able to distribute the fruits of India's growth to a larger and larger number of people, and our dream remains to be a wealth creator for every Indian. Thank you so much for all your supports, and thank you so much for all your blessings.